I think we all know each other well enough that I can dispense with some of the kind of lofty quasi-academic titles. This session is just going to be called Assemblyland Real Talk, okay? Because I want to describe to you, drawing on all of these different experiences and adventures, some of the things that you are perhaps likely to encounter in the course of setting yourself up for success. And it's not a straightforward proposition. You know, there has been a current already this weekend running through our discussions that we are somehow, as a fledgling but growing community, going to arrest what we perceive as a decline in the well-being of democratic societies, not only here in the US, where it perhaps is most significantly pronounced, but also in many other Western jurisdictions too, right? And I don't in any way want to diminish the significance of this work to the moment. You are in the room at the beginning of something that has the potential to really set in motion a phase change in how we think about representative democracy. But I want everyone also to appreciate that the work of universal suffrage, right, by which only 4/5 of our society has the vote, was a project that took place over the better part of 400 years. So we all got to settle in and get comfy, because we're playing a very long game. And I'll be honest with you that one of the concerns that plays in the back of my mind is whether this wave can accelerate quickly enough that we're not superseded by the deepening crisis that we face. Nevertheless, we just have to keep going, right? And appreciate that much as there was in the history of representative democracy, as we've experienced it so far, there are going to be significant setbacks. There are going to be times in which this work falls entirely out of favor, where it is disparaged, where it's lampooned, where it is utterly corrupted in other jurisdictions. And we're going to have to keep going. So it's a really special thing to be in this room, because right now we've found each other, right? And so we can support each other in the many, many miles ahead. There is, however, of course, another reason for doing this work that is maybe less world historic, and it's simply the fact that a lot of public engagement sucks, right? Like, it's just really bad. Like, whatever you might think in a high-minded way about democracy, the reality is that municipal administrations, state administrations, they have a lot of trouble just doing the workaday business of hearing from people in a way that doesn't make those people feel like crap. All right? So we could just start by trying to fix that. And just to remind everyone that this is like absolutely common knowledge, let me turn to the wonderful people from NBC and a show familiar to everyone in this room, Parks and Recreation.
They are the men and women on the front lines for improving their community.
Everyone in North America is now in on the joke, right? This is why it's so hard to get people to turn out for a town hall meeting, right? Because they know the decisions have already been made, right? They know that people are going to be talking down to them. I have for many, many years wanted to get a nurse to come with me to a stereotypical town hall meeting, and I'd like him or her to bring the kind of heart rate monitor, the neural probes, all of that, and I'd like that person waiting in line at that single microphone to get wired up. I'd like to be wired up because I'd like to see what's happening to them biochemically, because I'm pretty sure their heart is starting to race and their hormones are starting to surge, and it's comical in one sense, but it's also kind of cruel. Like, we're supposed to be the mature Western democracy. Are we saying that the most sophisticated way we have to hear from people is to put them into a bona fide stress response so that they can simply speak as one voice to power? What? Come on. We can do a little bit better. My own connection to this work doesn't start, however, in a sweaty rec center. It starts at a maybe equally undistinguished political space, a constituency office. I was a student of politics, and around 2000, everyone was concerned about the growing democratic deficit. People thought, well, if we try referenda, well, if we change the way our Senate operates, well, if we do all of these really significant, like, major political reforms, then we will reverse this deficit and reconnect people to politics. And I became really interested in a kind of really quirky, off the beaten track part of Canada's political system, maybe one of the most significant democratic reforms that Canada's ever undertaken, especially given that no one ever voted for it. And it was the advent of offices like this. Canada's a big country. If you know anything about Canada, it's that. And it's relatively sparsely populated. And only in the 1970s did we actually have MPs starting to travel back and forth between their local ridings and Ottawa. Previously, they'd come to Ottawa, they'd spend the winter there. The line was, honey, I'm off to the city to make the laws. I'll be back in the spring to plant the seeds. We're an agrarian country that was industrializing, and that's part of our political history. And then a woman got elected to Parliament named Flora MacDonald. And she said, no, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to keep in touch. And the way I'm going to keep in touch, I'm going to open a little office, and I'm going to pay for it with my own salary. And people are going to be able to come and talk to me about policy matters. And I'll be able to inform them what's happening in Parliament, and I will organize these town hall meetings and other things, but there will at least be a physical bit of Parliament in the community. That will be the physical connection. And it didn't take long before other MPs thought, well, that's smart, I want some of that. And it wasn't much longer before many of the kind of democratic aspirations of what now is like a 308 strong office network throughout the country became a service bureau for people just trying to get, you know, passports processed and benefit checks mailed on time. And that created a bit of a hazard for MPs because, hey, if you can help people, they're going to remember that, they're going to get reelected. So I decided I would travel across the country. I visited almost 100 of these offices and spent several months in a truck and visiting what I thought of as the root system of Parliament. And the incredible thing is I would meet these largely middle-aged women who run these offices and work in them, very gendered dimension to our politics because the young male hotshots, they wanted to be in Ottawa, right? But for many of the women who worked, imagine that, being a hotshot wanting to work in Ottawa. How freaking lame. Anyway, so you have these mostly middle-aged women who tell me time and time again that this is the best job they've ever had. Now think about it. People are coming in every day saying something's gone wrong, fix it. And they feel so good because they've become ace navigators within the system and they can solve it. And so they would say to me again and again and again, I have a better job than my boss because I actually get to make a difference. Real sense of pride. In fact, so much so that when their boss lost, they would often work for the next person, right? Because they felt that this was their way to make a difference. So here I am, like 100 offices and hearing these stories and like just like glowing with this kind of sense of public service, pride and ethos. And then I would always ask one of these questions, the significance of which, you know, I didn't understand at the time. I'd say, when was the last time you had a town hall meeting? And these glowing faces would darken and their eyebrows would furrow, and a woman in Newfoundland with an accent that I'll leave you to imagine said to me, boy, you only get out the mad, the bad, and the sad anyway. Why would I be wanting to do that? And you know, at the time, I think I probably like politely chuckled. Oh yeah, mad, the bad, the sad. We all get it, right? But I didn't understand the history of those offices and what their purpose. The purpose was to actually convene community. And the government, by this point, had spent loads of money and it wasn't working. And the people who were so like public-minded and public-spirited, they didn't want to do the work because they really didn't know how. And I think that's the challenge that all of us continue to face, because we can talk about a democratic wave and the kind of revolution it implies. We can talk a lot about this word, trust. I've heard many people say, well, if we run a citizens assembly, will people be more likely to trust us? Will they be more likely to trust government? The problem is not that people don't trust government. The problem is that government doesn't trust people. And the real work is convincing government and government institutions, and even the best-minded of those people working within those institutions, like my friend in Newfoundland, that we have to trust people as a matter of first principle. And we have to set in motion the kinds of processes that demonstrate that trust and frankly demonstrate a vulnerability. But I don't even like the word trust. I think it gets in the way. I think trust is a bit of an amalgam of a whole bunch of other things. So when I see those trust barometers of it declining, I think we can be more precise. I don't think it's a decline in trust. I think it's a decline in the perception of capability. I think what's really going on is that we see government as less and less capable of delivering in a whole bunch of different ways. And that's a different seminar entirely. But I think why we don't trust people is because we see them as too emotional and volatile and ill-informed, as not really being up to the task of being fair-minded and far-sighted, of exercising public judgment, of taking on new information, of weighing trade-offs, all of the work that is required at any level, in any system that can claim to call itself a democracy. So capability is what we're looking to build, both on the state capacity side and on the public capacity side. So my colleague Sarah, she talked about the kind of three currents of the deliberative wave, and I just want to pull it apart a little, just for a moment more, because I think it's important, because there are very different things happening in these different currents. And this is not about one being better than the other. We need all of them. We need the Irish to be doing these kick-ass national assemblies to make the headlines that help the wave gain the attention and credibility with senior decision makers, and also to demonstrate what this can look like at scale. But the reality is, bless Ireland, they're only ever going to be able to impanel like 100 people a year. That's not going to add up to a visceral experience of capability distributed in the population, right? And bless our Belgian friends as well, because they're actually demonstrating what the future of representative government can look like, where electeds and selecteds can see value in each other. One of the lines I like best from a parliamentarian in Eupen, when asked, how do you feel about all these people coming into the chamber? They're like, well, truth be told, we always behave a little bit better when we have guests in the house, right? You know, we do put guests in the house. We call it the gallery, except we stick them up in the nosebleed section where they actually can't have any relationship with the people down below. So this is, again, an evolution of our parliamentary infrastructure and our approach to representative democracy. The regulatory is so critical, though, because it may not generate the headlines. But there are a bajillion decisions that public administrators at all levels of our society have to make every year. And all of those decisions, when they are of consequence, when there's no easy answer, a clear right and wrong, are potential venues to bring in people to help solve the problems. And part of our social expectation ought to be that those decisions are made with people, because we'll get better decisions, but it's also going to have an extrinsic effect of raising the democratic fitness of our society. And this isn't about people, quote, getting what they want. It's actually about taking on the burden of representation, of using your voice to speak for others. It's a totally different modality than what we expect of people through normal democratic repertoires today. So we need the regulatory current, and we need the three currents working together because they provide the institutional change, the profile, but ultimately the scale. Now, let's be honest. You've heard from many people who have the honor and pleasure and all the rest of it of running these assemblies. And so you might think that we spend all our time in the company of citizens. Nope. I spend 95% in the company of public servants. That's the iceberg of this work. And I spend my time trying to create the conditions for policy impact. There, we did it. So how does that work? Because like real talk, I want to disabuse you a few things. You know, the standard run-up time for us to do a municipal process is probably 6 months, minimum, on the back of a track record and with a lot of relationships. When we're doing a national process, like Sarah described with CADE, that's like probably 18 months to 2 years in the making. 2 years before we cash a check, let's be clear about that, but also before we have the sign-off, right? And then can set into motion all the process details that we've been discussing. And so what are we doing with folks here in that iceberg? 3 M's. We're waiting for a certain alignment to occur. Like I said, it's a long game. This work requires real patience. First, you're waiting for the mandate, right? A clear mandate from a public authority, right? Someone who's going to be able to take the recommendations and actually do something with them. And that window is often very tight. Why? Budgets, electoral cycles, events that then consume all the political energy, right? The personalities of the political leaders themselves. So part of the patience is also maintaining a state of readiness to like be set to go when the mandate is clear, right? That moment, as I mentioned, is brief, where not only are the political features kind of aligned, but there's probably a wider public moment that has formed around the topicality or consequence of the issue. People know that something needs to change, right? And government can use its license to then push ahead. And the last bit too is the money, right? Whether it's a $150,000 project or a $1.5 million project, public funds are always scarce, right? And I'll say one thing that may be unpopular. We are always trying to reduce the budget of every project we take on. Why? Because as my friend Eve said yesterday, the first design criteria of any sort of public deliberative process is legitimacy. And one of the things that can quickly be a source of criticism is somebody saying, what, it costs you $60,000 a weekend to bring together 30 people? What of it, right? So we're like, the money is a really important component of all of this as well, that itself becomes political. So you end up looking for alignment of all these things. A chance when decision makers are seized by the idea, seized by the process, are prepared to resource it, have a clear question, and the calendar is your friend. Whew, that is a pretty small aperture. And that is why the path to policy impact starts with the word no. Because when I'm in iceberg land, of course I have lots of people saying, hey, we heard about the assembly, and we'd like to get people together to think about the future of green space. Is there a question? right? Like, yes, we should have people thinking about the future of green space. That sounds like an ideation exercise. That sounds like something that's suited to 20 other methodologies, maybe not an assembly, which is ultimately about weighing different defined policy choices and finding consensus around one of them. So great, let's help find the right participatory method to do it, not assembly. Our government has decided that we are going to implement a very controversial policy, and we want a citizens assembly. We've decided you're implementing a policy. Why do you need a citizens assembly, right? We have a great topic. We know there's a lot of public interest in this. It's a real consequence. We don't have any money. Can't go forward, right? We have this exact situation right now with the Senate of Canada, which wants to create a youth assembly on climate change. And there's a Senate caucus on climate. And they can't fund, they have no commissioning budget, right? So everything else lines up. Believe me, really timely in Canada right now. Really great to have a public authority like the Senate interested, but by a quirk of kind of parliamentary appropriation, they can't fund it. So you have to get used to saying no. But the payoff for saying no is success, because it means the things that you say yes to are going to have a vastly greater chance of succeeding. So we always say in iceberg land, when we're trying to assess whether this thing can go forward, we say to the policymakers or the senators or the politicians, we say, well, really be honest with me. What problem are you trying to solve, right? That's the first question. Is there a clearly defined problem? The second one is my favorite. What do you want to learn that you don't already know? Because if you can huddle with your caucus or 6 stakeholders and you can kind of hit 80, 85 percentile of what you think is the answer, I'm not sure if it's worth the trouble and expense and exposure of a citizens assembly to like close that delta, right? Again, there are other political tools that you can use that also have democratic value. So we have to become, I think, as a community, quite discerning about this work. And honestly, there has to be a range of plausible policy outcomes. There's got to be like an A, B, C, or D, and the client has to be reasonably agnostic about which one they choose and be prepared to implement it. Otherwise, it'll just be kind of citizen washing, right? They chose the thing that seemed evident, did an assembly, validated it, right? It's elaborate way to do kind of public relations. However, when we're all cocky about saying no, because, you know, it's not right, it's not good enough, the conditions aren't perfect, we have to be really humble. We have to be humble on a number of fronts here. There can be a slight tendency amongst those who are putting forward the next version of democracy to pretend that the current version of democracy has no innate legitimacy, to actually be a bit superior, a little better than it all. Because yeah, a lot of it's bad, and a lot of it's we want to change, but you don't make friends and influence people, much less convince them to take what they feel is a political risk if they feel in some way that you're looking down on them, and you're looking down at it all. So the right approach is to be discerning, but to be helpful, to really, in the same way that we encourage our members to put themselves in each other's shoes, to put ourselves in the shoes of our clients, of those public decision makers. I would like to believe that most of the assemblies that we've run have been commissioned by people who believe in all of the high-minded democratic ideals that you and I might. The reality is that most of them have been senior public administrators who find themselves between a rock and a hard place. And they have tried everything else, and they have to make a decision they know they're going to have to wear, and they would like to be able to point to something credible to say, no, this is why we made the decision. For them, the pain of the status quo, right, is now greater than the pain they associate with innovation, right? The status quo is more painful. That's the condition where they're like, okay, I'm prepared to invest in something different. And wow, good on them, right? They may feel pushed into it, but boy, we got to hold them. We got to support them. We've got to make them feel confident in having taken that risk, and we better not screw it up, right? Those are the circumstances for policy impact that exist for those of us who, unlike art, love art, the Prime Minister doesn't call, right? Right? How many of you are waiting a call from Biden? Anybody? Okay. So, this is like the real world of this work where we're not senior public servants sitting next to the Prime Minister's office. Not only do we have to try and support that client who's taking that risk against all of the advice that they're probably getting them, telling them not to do it, we also can't fall prey to the idea that we're doing some sort of like really pristine social science experiment and that we need to keep it in like a quarantined environment where those electeds, we've got to keep them at a distance. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to work on Ontario's Citizens Assembly and running the parallel youth assembly. I had to call every member of provincial parliament in order to set up a one-on-one interview between the kid from their riding and them. It seemed like a nice thing to do, right? We're going to buddy up these teens with their MPP and they're going to talk about electoral reform. And I got through to many of those members of provincial parliament, and they would figure out that I wasn't a public servant and I wasn't in the party, but I seemed to know something about this assembly, and I seemed to also know something about electoral reform. And in the privacy of that brief conversation, I was astounded at how many would kind of confess to me that they didn't understand what the assembly was, and they didn't understand what the voting system was, and could I just like quickly brief them on it. We forget that one of the critical audiences for this work are the electeds and the relationships we can build with them. We're not just handing a report over. Last week I was in Victoria, Canada, where we are running a Citizens Assembly on the amalgamation of the provincial capital. So, not high stakes political stuff, except if you live in Victoria, for which there's nothing more important. And both councils commissioned it. So 2 mayors, 2 councils. This has been years in the making. They even did a plebiscite where they got the support of the public behind this idea. And I went to sit down, not in the budget, with each councillor and the mayors. It's many years in the making. Both voted for it. There's been a plebiscite. And almost to a person, they asked me to take them through the process. And many of them started with, how are the members selected? And who are they going to hear from? And what are we going to do with the results? And they're not dumb. They're not dumb. They're busy politicians who have like 100 things coming at them. And this is news, so they couldn't just put it in the bucket called focus group or committee. And when you're, apprehensive about something, right, you sometimes then think the worst of it. So we actually need to cultivate those relationships. And this is why, as I'll start to conclude, you really do have to be committed to the long game. You're playing 3 games. You're playing a long policy game. I mean, look, you heard the story of Cade about online harms. It's really a project that's been 5 years from the government's initial white paper, it then setting this in motion. Now we're going to have an election next year. Hopefully they can pass the bill, right? But this isn't going to be the last time the Canadian Parliament legislates on regulating social media, right? There are no kind of big, there aren't big bangs. There aren't, like, policy is iterative. You keep returning to the same thing again and again and again. It's the reason why people have blue ribbon commissions and task forces on the topics that they had just 10 or 15 years before, saying much the same thing. I wish governments move faster. I wish it was possible to lock in these changes. But iteration is the work. And so we have to be prepared to wait out and sit through policy cycles. And some of my friends who've been at this for a long time knows exactly what that means. But we also have to play the long game with people. So one of the things I want to say, many people are familiar with an adoption curve, right? I'm sure Harry has seen this more than a few times. I rarely see it applied to this work, though, because this is where things start to get mainstream. You might be saying, well, 20 years of all of this work, surely we're over here. No. You're among the visionaries. We're still here. There is a wide world of people still to experience, think about, resist, question, challenge, everything that we increasingly take for granted. So maybe this is the other wave that we need to pay more attention to, and how we can, as quickly as possible, move through different segments who will have a different orientation to the work. People. I mentioned that Cade, 5 years in the making, and when Bill C-63 was tabled in February, we sent out a news bulletin to the members. It had been for some of them 2 years since they had met. And periodically I would get emails saying, Pete, we gave you like 6 hours of our time. Where's the bill? I'd be like, I don't know, government's got a lot of things to do. Well, I'm hearing good things, don't know when it's going to come. And then C-63 came out. We told them about it. And this exceptional woman named Cheryl, who has not had many advantages in life. One of the things about being on Zoom with the members during the pandemic is that you'd get a little window into their lives, right? And you could see that it was pretty chaotic for Cheryl, and she was of retirement age. She was very excited to be chosen for this. And she sent me this email back saying, I'm more proud of our work with Cade than I am with my 8 years of military service. Go figure. One of the things that's easy to forget about when you get to come into fancy buildings like this in incredible cities like DC is that the way we practice politics isn't just about making people a little crazy at the microphone line. It's that most people go through their lives, or at least a sizable proportion of our population goes through their lives without not just government giving a shit what they think about anything, but without their employers caring, often without their family members really caring, that the experience of being impaneled, being put in a kind of public office, being supported and staffed to use their capabilities to bring their best into that conversation will be the one and only experience they may have in their lives, of feeling as though their voice matters. Some people have said that this work is about getting past politics. This work is deeply political. This work is about the politics of human dignity. And it's about making sure that we create a system of government where everyone feels as though they count. And we're nowhere close. The work that we've done over the years has brought people like our former Chief Justice, the Honorable Beverly McLaughlin, to tables with Don Sugimoto from Lethbridge, Alberta. This doesn't happen in the course of normal politics, but it's entirely possible because you're affording everyone something beautiful. Purpose, community, and the chance to make a difference. That's why through all of the work, we've learned that people want to say, God help them, they'll turn out to those town hall meetings. But what I think people are really looking for is the opportunity to serve. We often frame this question of democratic decline as though it's a question of scarcity. There aren't enough good people. There aren't enough public-minded people. That people are too selfish. What if we have it totally backwards? That our problem is that we have all of this untapped resource, that politics is stalled because people feel really stunted. So we need to find better ways to tap into that and bring our politics back to life.